Welcome to OOTO TV, the out-of-the-office investigation from our past into the future of personal health and psychophysiological actualization. This time we're discussing neurolinguistic programming, personal health, and actualization. I'm Robbins.
And I'm Rogers. It's great to be with you. You know, Robbins, today we are diving into a field that is, to put it mildly, just completely fascinating. Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP for short. I've heard it called a user's manual for the brain, this idea that we can finally understand the mental software that's running the show, dictating how we think, how we feel, and ultimately what we do.
That's a perfect way to put it. And on our OOTO TV investigation today, we're not just going to explore how that software gets written, often by accident through our life experiences. We're going to investigate something far more empowering: how we can actually become the programmers, how we can potentially go in and rewrite the code for better health and a fundamentally better life. We've laid out a roadmap for our journey today, broken down into 5 key parts. First up, we're going to uncover what's called the invisible map that shapes your unique reality. Honestly, this is the idea that everything else is built on, right? And from there, we'll start decoding the mental software that actually creates that map. We'll look at the frankly aggressive filtering system your brain has to use just to keep from being overwhelmed. After that, we'll open up the NLP toolkit itself and check out some of the specific techniques designed for really rapid change. And that, Rogers, brings us right to the heart of it all. How can these mental shifts actually reprogram our physical health? We're going to look at some incredibly compelling case studies and hard data. And finally, we'll tackle the big question head-on. Is NLP this revolutionary tool for human potential? Or, as its critics have claimed for years, is it just a pseudoscience? We're going to lay out both sides of the argument and let you be the judge. All right, so let's jump right in with the most fundamental idea in all of neurolinguistic programming. And it's a big one, so buckle up. You are not experiencing reality directly. None of us are.
That is a bold claim to open with, Robbins, but you're right. It's absolutely central to this entire model. The idea is that we're all interacting with a sort of construct, an interpretation of the world that's unique to each of us.
Exactly. Just think of it like this. You're living inside a completely personalized, heavily filtered version of the world. It's as if you were born wearing a unique pair of glasses that colors everything you see, hear, and feel. And you've been wearing them for so long you've completely forgotten they're even there. And this brings us to the crucial question that NLP is entirely built on. Are you responding to the world as it truly is, in all its objective detail, or are you actually responding to your internal representation, your mental map of the world? The proposition here is that just understanding this one distinction can fundamentally alter how you experience every single moment of your life.
It's an incredibly powerful idea, Robbins, because it completely shifts the locus of control. It suggests that our reactions, our emotions, even our limitations, they aren't directly dictated by what happens to us. They're dictated by the meaning our internal map assigns to those events. It explains how two people can go through the exact same experience and have wildly different emotional and even physiological responses. It all comes down to their maps.
Okay, let's make this real. Let's get tangible with it.
Yeah, let's try a quick thought experiment so everyone can see this in action for themselves. I want everyone listening to imagine a very simple data-limited scenario. Person A runs up and hits person B. That's it. That's all the information you have. Now, right now, in your mind, create a story. Who are these people? Where are they? What's the context here? Why did this happen? Just notice the very first story that pops into your head, because that narrative you just created reveals far, far more about your internal map than it does about the objective event itself.
So Rogers, be honest. What story did your map create just now?
Well, my map immediately went to a playground. I pictured 2 kids, maybe 6 or 7 years old, fighting over a bright red toy truck in a sandbox. One of them gets frustrated, gives the other a shove. There are tears, maybe a scraped knee. The emotions are all about frustration, possessiveness, immaturity. That's where my brain went.
That's fascinating. My map went somewhere completely different. I saw 2 professional fighters in an MMA octagon during a sanctioned match. The hit was a strategic, totally legal move in a high-level sport. The context is competition, rules, athleticism. The emotions are focus, controlled aggression, maybe even sportsmanship. Now, just look at these 2 possibilities. In one, we have childhood conflict, in the other, professional sport. From the exact same 7 words, person A runs up and hits person B. Our minds created entirely different realities, complete with different emotions, consequences, and even moral judgments.
And that, right there, brilliantly illustrates one of the foundational beliefs of NLP. It's a quote they adopted from the philosopher Alfred Korzybski, and it's simply this: the map is not the territory. It's such a simple phrase, but it is so profound. The actual world, the territory, is one thing. But the mental representation we use to navigate it, our map, which is built from our unique combination of beliefs, memories, values, and all our past experiences, that is something else entirely. And we live, breathe, and react based on our map, not the territory itself. We don't get angry at what someone said, we get angry at our interpretation of what they said. That's a game-changing distinction.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. We're all walking around navigating life with these unique subjective maps. But that leads to the next logical question, Robbins, which is, how are these maps even constructed in the first place? Why does my map immediately jump to a playground while yours goes straight to an MMA ring? And why do both of them feel so real and so immediate to us? Where does all this code even come from?
An excellent question, Rogers. And the answer all starts with the sheer, overwhelming flood of information our senses are exposed to every single second. Scientists have estimated that at any given moment, there are about 2 million bits of data available to us through our 5 senses. Every sight, every sound, every smell, every sensation hitting our body. It's a sensory tidal wave, an absolute data deluge.
And our brains obviously can't handle all of that. There's no way.
Not even close. It's not even in the same ballpark. Of those 2 million available bits of information, our unconscious mind can maybe process about 134,000. That's already a massive filter, a 93% reduction. But our conscious mind, the part that's you right now, the part that's listening to this, it can only handle about 7 pieces of information at once. 7 plus or minus 2. Just think about that staggering reduction for a second. From 2 million available bits of raw data down to maybe 9 that we are consciously aware of. Our brain has no choice but to be an incredibly aggressive filter just to prevent a total system overload.
So the reality that we're consciously aware of, our moment-to-moment experience, is built from less than 1/100,000th of the information that's actually out there. That is a really sobering thought.
So how does the brain pull off this incredible feat of data reduction? Well, according to NLP, it uses 3 primary universal filtering processes. First, there's deletion. This is where we simply ignore most of what's happening around us. For instance, you are probably deleting the feeling of the chair beneath you or the ambient temperature of the room until I just mentioned it. It's absolutely necessary for focus.
But that can also be a huge problem, right? Like, in an argument, you might delete all the evidence that contradicts your point of view.
Exactly. The second filter is distortion. This is where we alter what we perceive, often to make it fit our existing beliefs. So if you believe your boss dislikes you, a totally neutral comment like, "nice work," can be distorted in your mind to sound like sarcasm. And third, there's generalization. This is where we take one specific experience and make it a universal rule. One bad experience with public speaking can easily lead to the generalization, "I am a bad public speaker."
And you can immediately see how those exact same tools that are necessary for survival, deletion, distortion, generalization, become the very architects of our limiting beliefs, our biases, and our phobias. They both build our map and create all of its blind spots.
You're listening to O2O TV with research by author Paul Bullo.
And this whole filtering process is precisely what neurolinguistic programming is all about, isn't it? The name itself is basically a description of this exact sequence. It is! Let's break it down for a moment. Neuro refers to our nervous system, how we take in all that information through our senses and run it through those 3 filters we just talked about. Linguistic refers to language, and that means both the words we say out loud and, more importantly, the internal dialogue we use to organize that information and give it meaning. And finally, programming refers to the unconscious patterns of behavior, the habits and the automatic reactions that result from that entire process. It was developed way back in the 1970s by a linguist, John Grinder, and a mathematician, Richard Bandler. They set out to model the patterns of highly successful therapists, hoping to create a kind of formula, a program for excellence.
And this brings us to the really exciting part of our investigation on Odo TV. Because NLP isn't just a descriptive theory, it's a prescriptive one. It doesn't just explain how the mind works, it provides a toolkit, a whole set of practical techniques to actively go in and edit the software.
So it's about moving from being just a passive user of your own mind to becoming an active programmer.
That is the perfect analogy, Rogers. It's about becoming the programmer of your own mind, not just the end user running default programs that were installed years ago without your permission.
And it's quite an extensive toolkit. We're seeing techniques on this list here with names like the meta model, quick phobia care, collapse positioning. It's a long and, I have to say, a somewhat esoteric sounding list. So Robbins, for our focus today on neurolinguistic programming, personal health, and actualization,
What are the key elements for us to really understand from within this whole toolkit? Maybe you could walk us through a couple of the most powerful ones.
Absolutely. Let's start with a foundational one called the Circle of Excellence. Imagine this, Rogers. Imagine you could bottle up your best ever feelings of confidence, calmness, and absolute focus, and then uncork that bottle whenever you needed it most, like right before a big presentation or a difficult conversation. That's essentially what this technique does. It's an anchoring process, where you vividly recall times you felt those powerful states and then mentally place those feelings into an imaginary circle on the floor right in front of you. By repeatedly stepping into that circle and re-experiencing those feelings, you literally train your nervous system to associate that physical spot with that peak state, giving you on-demand access to your best self. It's like having a superpower on tap.
So it's a way of conditioning a desired state into your neurology. Okay, what about something more therapeutic? For that, an incredibly powerful technique is called eye integration. In this process, a person holds a troubling memory in their mind while they follow a practitioner's finger as it moves through different quadrants of their visual field. This bilateral stimulation forces the brain to access different neural pathways while the memory is active. And the result isn't that the memory is erased, the facts of what happened remain, but its negative emotional charge gets neutralized. It's like the memory loses its power to hijack you in the present moment. And what's just fascinating there is the striking similarity to EMDR. That's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a widely accepted clinical therapy for trauma today. It really suggests that NLP was tapping into a valid neurological mechanism for reprocessing memories long before it was ever part of mainstream science. So, Robbins, these tools for changing thoughts and feelings are genuinely fascinating. They seem incredibly powerful for personal development. But this brings us to the absolute core of our investigation today, and I have to ask the mandatory question: how can neuro-linguistic programming actually affect our mental and physical health? Where does this mental code meet our actual cells?
I am so glad you asked that, because this is where the theory becomes life-changing reality. This table shows the results from a study conducted with psychiatric patients at Benazir Bhutto Hospital in Pakistan. And look, this isn't just about feeling a bit better. This is about profound recovery. Take a look at the first case, a 30-year-old male, absolutely crippled by anxiety attacks and a deep fear of failure. The intervention used specific NLP techniques like collapse positioning and quick phobia care. And the outcome? Improved social skills, resolved a long-standing conflict with his mother, and better emotional control.
And these are not minor issues we're talking about. Look down at female 2, age 36, suffering from severe depression and trauma from spousal abuse. The intervention included something called the identity model and quick phobia care. The outcome reported by the study was that she was freed from depression and unpleasant experiences and was actively rebuilding her life. The speed of these changes is what's just remarkable.
Exactly. And the list goes on. Panic attack severity decreased for a 25-year-old female. Motivation and influence regained for a 24-year-old male who is suffering from insomnia due to academic failure. So this brings us to that critical question we have to ask. Can neuro-linguistic programming improve our human health? This study strongly suggests the answer is a resounding yes.
Based on this kind of evidence, we can confidently state that neuro-linguistic programming as it relates to personal health and actualization suggests that NLP may be good for health.
It seems like a very direct line, doesn't it? We see a psychological intervention leading to a significant documented improvement in clinical conditions that have very real, very physical symptoms. This isn't just theory anymore, Robbins. This is the mind-body connection in powerful, observable action. The software of the mind is directly impacting the hardware of the body.
And we can take this a step further, Rogers, right down to the cellular level. Just think about what states like chronic anxiety, trauma, and depression do to the body. They flood our system with stress hormones like cortisol, creating this constant low-grade state of emergency. That internal biochemical environment is just hostile to healing and regeneration.
It's the classic fight-or-flight response, but it's stuck in the on position. The body is constantly diverting all its resources to immediate survival, not to long-term health and repair. Precisely. So this leads us to our next mandatory statement, and it's a big one.
Neuro-linguistic programming creates a healthy environment for cellular growth and success. By resolving these stressful psychological states at their root, NLP helps shift the body's entire chemistry from a state of threat to a state of repair and growth. That is the absolute foundation of physical health.
And let's get even more specific and talk about our mitochondria. These are the little powerhouses inside our cells, producing the energy for virtually every single biological process in our bodies. And we know they are incredibly sensitive to their chemical environment. Exactly, it's well-established science that chronic stress and high cortisol levels directly damage mitochondrial function.
They literally drain our cellular batteries and accelerate the aging process. Therefore, this leads to another critical assertion we must make. Exposure to neurolinguistic programming is critical to our mitochondrial health. Any practice, like the NLP techniques we've seen in action, that effectively resolves the root causes of that chronic stress is, by extension, supporting the health and efficiency of the very engines that power our entire bodies. You're listening to OOOT TV with research by author Paul Bulow. And for those who want the hard, quantitative data beyond those powerful case studies, here it is. A 2025 randomized controlled trial took a group of highly stressed individuals and split them into 3 groups: a control group, a yoga-only group, and a group that combined yoga with NLP.
And the results were just striking. While yoga alone definitely helped, the combined yoga and NLP group saw the most significant improvements across the board. And we're talking about measurable physiological reductions in things like blood pressure, heart rate, and salivary cortisol, the physical markers of stress. And at the exact same time, there were dramatic drops in their own reported stress and anxiety scores. This isn't just a subjective feeling of being better. This is objective physiological change that you can measure in the blood and on a heart rate monitor. The proof is right there.
So, when we synthesize all of this evidence, from the clinical case studies to the cellular logic with the mitochondria, and now this randomized controlled trial data, we arrive at a really powerful conclusion.
It's the final mandatory statement for this section of our investigation. Neuro-linguistic programming can be linked to preventing illness and increasing longevity. By giving individuals the tools to manage chronic stress, resolve deep-seated trauma, and cultivate a more resourceful internal state, NLP acts as a powerful form of preventative medicine. It's all about creating health from the inside out.
I have to admit, Robbins, the case studies and the physiological data you've presented are incredibly compelling. For the individuals involved in those studies, the results seem absolutely undeniable. However, for a balanced investigation, we really can't ignore the elephant in the room. For decades now, NLP has been dogged by persistent criticism from parts of the academic and scientific communities. They raise some valid questions about its origins and its validation that we need to address.
Okay, let's look at this debate head-on. On the pseudoscience side of the argument, critics often point to what they call its disorganized nature. They argue that many of its core claims haven't been subjected to the kind of large-scale double-blind studies that are really the gold standard of scientific validation. And because it deals with subjective experience, it's inherently difficult to quantify and measure in a traditional lab setting. And you know what, Rogers? Those are fair points, if you're looking at this through a purely academic, mechanistic lens. But now look at the practical tool column. While some people debate the theory, the practitioners on the ground are pointing to the results. The case studies we saw showed people being freed from years of depression. The Yoga Plus NLP trial showed measurable drops in the stress hormone cortisol. For the person whose panic attacks have suddenly stopped, or the person who has finally overcome a lifelong phobia, the debate over whether it's science or a functional model is completely and totally irrelevant. The outcome is what matters. NLP is and always has been unapologetically results-oriented. If a technique works and produces a positive change, it's considered useful, period.
And this brings everything we've discussed today, the filters, the stories, the techniques, the debate, it brings it all right back to you, our listener. It all comes down to this single, empowering question. Your current mental map, with all of its incredible strengths and all of its blind spots, has guided you to this very moment listening to our show. But the map is not fixed. The territory doesn't change, but you can always redraw your map. So the question we want to leave you with today is this: where will you draw it next?
That is a powerful thought to end on, Robbins. Thank you for joining us for this investigation on OOTV TV. We hope it has given you a new perspective on the incredible power of your own mind.